Is this working? Okay, great. Welcome everyone to our panel about the making of the short film Picchu. Before we get started, we're just going to do some short introductions. So I'll begin and then we'll just go down the line. My name is Haley Cannell and I am a CG supervisor at AWS. Before working at AWS, I was at Nimble Collective, where we were also working on cloud solutions for animation and visual effects studios. So I've about 7 years of experience doing productions in the cloud. And on Picchu, I did a lot of lighting, compositing, and I also created all of the foliage that you see in the environments of the film. So, Amaro, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Haley. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Super excited. My name is Amaro Seas. I am the writer and director of Picchu. I have more than 15 years of experience in the CG industry, working in video games, final animation, and then VFX houses and things like that. I joined Amazon 5 years ago through AGS, and now working with these guys. Super excited. Yep, that's me. Chris?
All right, so I'm Chris Fudge, production designer and art director for the Fuzzy Pixel team at Amazon. I've also been in the industry about 15 years. I started off doing commercials. I worked at a place called PsyOp in New York and LA. Been around for a while doing pretty much every part of the pipeline besides animation and rigging. And then joined Amazon, I've been there about 8 years now, so it makes me very Amazon old. And I started doing games like Amaro did. I did AR, VR, and I was very fortunate to meet up with Jason and the rest of the Nimble Collective team and form our Fuzzy Pixel team.
Thank you, Chris. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Schleifer, also been in the industry for quite a while, and I too am old, but not as Amazon old. Been in the industry about 27 years as an animator, pipeline TD, character TD. Was one of the co-founders of the Nimble Collective, super excited about helping people create content in the cloud. Worked at DreamWorks Animation for a number of years as an animator and head of character animation, and before that, Weta Digital on Lord of the Rings. And I'm a creative director here on the Fuzzy Pixel team, and we're super excited to talk about what we've been doing this past, how many months? 8 months? 10 months?
Year-ish for some. Yeah.
So we're going to actually show you all the film. This will be the first time that we're watching the film with an audience, so we're super excited about that. But before we watch it, Jason, can you just explain a little bit about our team and how we operate within our org and how we work as artists at AWS?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. So we probably have one of the most exciting jobs that you can have as an artist. We work for AWS, which makes a bunch of incredible services for creating content and using the cloud. You know, we've got workstations and rendering in the cloud, and we've got Nimble Studio, which is amazing for helping artists use the cloud to create content. And what we get to do is sort of try things out and see how they work. We're sort of, artist zero or studio zero. So when we're trying to figure out like how do we create content, we get to experiment and do things that work, and we get to do things that don't work. And we get to then give those things to engineers and help them figure out how to make them better. Or we write documentation and help other studios figure out how to use those things. And throughout the talk today, we're going to talk about some of the ways that we really influenced Nimble Studio as it came out and some of the experiments that we tried. And it's pretty amazing to be able to experiment like this.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, we're going to watch Picchu. So we hope you enjoy.
Mijita, es hora.
No quiero ir. No quiero.
Confía, mi muchacha. Toma. Esto es para vos. Yo sé que puedes.
¡Váyase, sargento! ¡Váyase! ¡Fuera de aquí! ¡Oye! ¡Ay, ay, ay! Ay, au. No pasa nada. Estoy bien. Ay, aquí voy. No.
Tranquila, muchacha. Tranquila. Respira.
Gracias, mamita. Gracias. Nunca arreglan las cosas aquí. ¡Nunca! Ya. Amita, ¿qué estás haciendo?
Minga, mi muchacha.
¿Minga?
Eso es. Todos compartimos en la comunidad.
Minga. El puente ya no tiene hueco. ¡Vamos! ¡Mayu! ¡Abura! ¡Ya comenzó la clase!
Pacha, soy tu hija, Quilla, soy tu voz, Guaira, soy tu vuelo, Sumacuarmi soy. Viajo por los Andes con gran emoción, busco el camino de mi corazón.
Ella va a estar bien.
¡Mamita!
Muchacha, llegaste.
Mira lo que dibujé en la clase, mamita.
Vuelo junto a un cóndor, miro todo alrededor, surco el universo, voy sintiendo su calor, riego junto a un río,
you. Hope you all enjoyed that. Okay, so we're just going to start off by hearing a little bit from our writer and director, Amaru. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Picchu and your inspiration for the film?
Absolutely. Thank you, Haley. I'm going to try not to make it too emotional because obviously this project means a lot to me. I still remember when I graduated from the Art Institute of Seattle. I am originally from Ecuador, so I had to come to the United States to fulfill one of my biggest dreams, which was to study animation, and actually I wanted to work for video games. And I still remember when my mom told me, probably like 8 years ago, she said to me, "You should use your work to give back to the community." And I'm like, "But Ma, how can I do that? I just do, art through a computer. How is it even possible? I think you're crazy." And she's like, "You'll find a way." And I think probably 4 years ago, I came to the realization that there is a way. And there's two big topics that I really, really wanted to get involved with. One is global warming, because yes, I believe in so. And the second one is education. I am not a dad. I do have a wonderful nephew and a niece. I love them so much. And I do believe that education is extremely important. From the beginning, Picchu, I knew that I wanted to do something with education even before pitching this story to the team. I was going to make it anyways. I'm super happy that the team decided to make Picchu because I was extremely happy. But why education? So I strongly believe that every single human being, every single kid, children around the world, they're capable of doing and achieving what they really want. But the problem is that we don't have opportunities. Not everybody has the same opportunity. And coming from a country, from South America, we have a big problem with education. So, doing the process of Picchu, trying to come up with a story, I was really going back to, where I'm from, my roots, and the experience that I had. In so many ways, Picchu is kind of like a reflection of my own story, how I came to the United States, start from zero. I didn't know the language too well, so I had to learn that as well, be away from family and friends. And that's kind of like a combination of, with education, my own story, the support of my family. They never gave up on me. And then when I was trying to create the film itself, okay, so I knew there was something about education, but then how can I make this appealing for the audiences and to remind everybody that this is a call for action. I don't see this film as a happy film or a sad film. It's just a reality that is still going on. And right now in Ecuador, it's even worse. There's a lot of discrimination from people, for indigenous people. And as you can see, Picchu takes place in the Andes of Ecuador. It's a place where it's far away. The government, they don't really help them with education and roads and things like that. So children and kids super young, they have to do these trips just to get to school, and I'm quoting that. This is also a tribute to the teachers, because I think teachers also do the same trip just to go there to the school and educate the kids. So a little bit about what Picchu and what Picchu means. So my name, Amaru, it means a snake in Quechua. And Quechua and Quichua is a language spoken in the Andes of South America, in Peru and Ecuador. Picchu means mountain, like Machu Picchu. I know probably some of you have heard of that before. And then Mayu means river. So why Mayu? Mayu is the name of our beautiful characters that Chris put a lot of love into it. So at the beginning, you can see that it says, the river makes its way through mountains. And that's pretty much the story that I had, the story that Mayu has, which is the river will always find its way through big mountains, big walls. And that's kind of like my reflection on my own story. Again, sorry I keep saying that again, but it is true. And
it's a very personal film for you, we can tell.
Yes, so I'm trying not to get emotional. But no, I'm super happy. I'm really thankful for everybody because they, were always behind me. They support me a lot. We really wanted to be, stay with authenticity. In terms of location, you can see the all the it's in Spanish. We work with musicians from Ecuador and all that. so yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the introduction what Picchu came from. I think with the team was also a really nice way to see where I came from and how's my culture and all that. And I think every time I keep watching this film and I don't get tired because I think it's beautiful. And we proved that, utilizing technology, we can send positive and meaningful messages, and I think we achieved that.
Yeah, and it was really cool being able to work with you because you're from Ecuador, and we were able to learn from you and use your knowledge to add that authenticity into each component that went into the film, which is something that we wanted to discuss next was the character design. So Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit about your process for how you designed the characters.
Yeah, so like Amaru said, we wanted to be very authentic. And for me, that's learning to figure out what I don't know. Because I don't need to make any assumptions. So we worked closely with Amaru's mom. She was our cultural advisor. And so Amaru and I started, we just pulled a ton of reference. As you can see up here, here's some of the more key reference that we were using, especially sort of the girl in the middle and the bottom. Amaru felt like these girls really represented the area of the Andes in Ecuador that we're trying to make the film about. So you can see some features that stand out, like the sort of redness on the cheeks from the sunburn and windburn. But I'm also looking at things like the shape of the nose, the shape of the eyes, the chin line, all that stuff. And then trying to also make an appealing character and make it a child. So what I started off with was just a series of speed sculpts. So I made, I don't know, probably 14 or 15 over the course of a couple weeks. Of which you can see a few here. I started off with a more realistic face because I really wanted to, in my mind, understand what the features were, where all the landmarks are, the specific shapes for, like I said, eyes and noses and things like that. And I was trying to, from there, push it into a style and just figure out what our style was going to be. And you can see by the time I got to like the third one up there on the top left or the bottom left, I sort of was able to make sort of an appealing character. It's like, okay, this could be something this would be proud of, but then I wanted to take it and push it farther and see if I can go out of my comfort zone and figure out something that was more unique to the film itself instead of sort of rinsing and repeat a style that I'm comfortable with. And so I really started to lean into the idea of, kids and children in general are like rounded features, especially like little chubby kids. That's something Amaru was always happy with, like, oh, look at the little chubby legs. And, and that's like that. The feedback is great.
Little chubby hands.
Yeah. And so I really leaned into that. And I made her face, like just pulled it horizontally until I felt it would almost break. And then I remember making the character, we showed Amaru's mom. And for me, it really hit home that we were onto something. Like, I think you were in a Zoom call with your mom, and you sent me a screenshot. And the look on her face was just so filled with like love, like she just wanted to scoop her up in her arms and just take her home with her. It's like, don't worry, it'll be okay, I'll take care of you. So for me, like, it was that moment that I was like, okay, I know I'm onto something, we're gonna get it right.
Yep.
Yeah, and here we can take a look at that final design that you put together, including all the clothing that you designed as well. So maybe you want to talk a bit about like what was the process for creating that clothing? Because there was a lot of information that you were able to get from Amaru and from his mom to build the clothing in a way that was authentic.
Yeah, again, a lot of reference. Like I can't express enough to any artist. It's all about reference, making sure that you're on point. And then running it by Amaru's mom to make sure we're good. So
She's
I learned that the skirt.
at 1/6. No.
Yeah, but like learning that, like what a pollera is. Mm-hmm. It's the skirt that's specific to that culture, and that the ponchos for the girls and the boys are actually different. Whereas the boys, like, it doesn't have any sort of break in the middle. And the girls is basically like a blanket that's wrapped around them, and it has a little pin that holds it together. And we really wanted to make sure that we got these things right. And then all the little flowery embroideries and things like that, that's the fun part of the job, to go and put all that stuff on there.
Yeah, and just to addition to that, I think Chris did an amazing job because based on the characters, after he created the characters, I was like, dude, that's just insane. Like, I love it. Like, I was, and I keep looking at it, like Chris was saying, like the pollera and the poncho is just beautiful. But also because Chris, he started with the character, so now we had a kind of like a style of the film. So then we can go back and build the environments towards the characters, because now we have something to go back to, right?
Right, exactly. And then just to finish off our style, basically, although we have a very sort of stylized macro shapes and things like that, we wanted to sort of maintain a material truth. So our cloths feel like cloth, skins feel like skin, things like that. We didn't want it to feel flat, like hand-drawn. We weren't really going for something of that style. So you, like down to every little tiny hair, keeping a little micro details and things like that, we felt was important.
Yeah, grounding it in reality was important to telling the story. Yeah, and one interesting thing about that process was, here's some pictures of some actual trees that are in Ecuador. This is the paper tree. It's a very iconic tree that you see in the Andes. And I did a pass on modeling the tree that was a little bit more true to the look of the actual paper tree on the left here. And after running it by Chris, after he had sort of established the style for the characters, he was like, hey, you know what, why don't we try making the leaves bigger, making them a little bit thicker, having it feel a little bit more of that like rounded, slightly more simplified look that would match with the style that he had come up with for the character. And so we kind of ran the tree through this process and came up with something that we really liked, and then applied that to everything that we created in the film, including the architectural elements. Amaro, maybe you can talk a little bit about your process for designing the door and the other architectural elements in the film.
Yep, thank you, Haley. But just to go back a little bit to the to the foliage, Haley, you did just crazy work. Like, I love every single, like, you built all the plants, the trees, and every time we show in this film in Ecuador, like, everybody comes to me like, oh my God, the landscapes are just so wonderful. And I'm like,
I did find some like research paper about like all of the foliage of the Andes, and I like went through it and was like highlighting the names and then doing like Google image searches. And
we learned a lot of new names.
Yeah.
I learned from Haley.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Haley. But yeah, thank you so much for all the other work. Beautiful. So this is a really interesting picture. Obviously, I was the writer and director, but I am a CG artist as well. I love to build things, to build environments.
And we're a small team, so we needed all the help that we could get.
Yes. So we were different hats. So this picture is interesting. So the real picture that you see there it was taken 45 years ago by my dad. My dad is an architect in Ecuador, and he was doing his thesis on how to build houses for people who are in need, and these places that kind of feel abandoned, right? So I took the door that he built 45 years ago, I put it into ZBrush, I sculpted, then I put into Substance Painter, and ended up rendering with Blender. So it was really, really nice for us to try to keep it, the authenticity to where all this architecture and environment is coming from, which is Ecuador. On the next one, we can see the house. Yeah, there you go. So for this one was pretty much the same. Yeah, I kind of like rely a lot on my dad. It was kind of funny because when I was building the house, and the house is made of adobe, and adobe is made of dirt, but the dirt that they use is the dirt that is actually right there on the farm. And when I was building this in 3D and I showed it to my dad, and he's like, well, the way that you're building it, the house is going to fall. I'm like, why? Because he's like, you had to put the blocks in a certain way so it feels more like realistic and things like that.
Structurally sound.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, but then after that, I definitely talked to Chris, rely on Chris and Haley just to make sure that the environment feels within the same realm with the characters that we had. Also, like you have the typical metal fences there with the posts, and then the clothing hanging outside just so they can dry it out and things like that.
Yeah, and then the last little bit with our style is we wanted to use it to reinforce the story as well. So everything is a little bit puffed up, a little bit bigger, with the idea that it's viewing through the eyes of Mayu, through the eyes of a child. Especially like the leaves on the foliage and things like that. We removed a lot of the leaves, but we made them bigger. We just wanted the environment to dwarf her a little bit, to bring that more sense of that it's more ominous, and it's basically her against the environment, trying to just make it to school.
Absolutely. And for the school itself, it was kind of like tricky because every time, when I was imagining Picchu, I always wanted to be the ending like an open of a curtain. Kind of like what the camera did, right? So the camera goes from behind the girls and then goes up and you actually see where they're going to. That was kind of like the big reveal. I always wanted that. So there was like two things for me, well, three things. Authenticity, so this type of, the goal and the basketball hood, is that how you say it?
Yeah. Basketball hood.
The combination is very typical there. Like you see that, and then you know it's from South America, Ali is from Ecuador. But then I wanted to make the school to be the happy moment of the girls, because there's one thing that we had to understand. These girls, and boys too, what they do at home, they're not behaving as kids. They're actually behaving as adults because they're helping on the farm. They're doing things that adults are supposed to do. So when they go to school, they get to be kids, what they actually meant to be at that age. So for them, it's extremely happy because they also know that that's their future. They go to school, get a diploma, and be someone, But also, I wanted to have the call for action here. So the school had to feel a little bit, kind of like abandoned a little bit, and just to show the world that this type of places they need help.
Yeah, a little rundown you can see here in the materials that sort of history is added to all of the elements of the school. Another really interesting thing about the film that I really enjoyed is how you brought the authenticity to the environment by using an actual mountain from Ecuador. This is a mountain that Amaru created, and down below you can see the reference photo for that. So maybe you can explain your process for how you created this mountain.
I consider myself a tech junkie. I love technology. I see technology like the best tool for us as an artist, because the more tools you use, I think, the faster you can create art. So for this was really interesting. I went to Google Earth and I grabbed real data from two of the main mountains in Ecuador, Chimborazo and Cotopaxi. And then I took that data into World Creator, created the height map, put it back into Substance Painter, check with Haley and Chris just to make sure that the look feels cohesive with the entire world. Do some painting, put it back in Blender, and then just do the render. So it was really fun to do it.
And yeah, here's that final result again, which I think turned out really nice. And especially with like all the lighting and everything, it really captures the look of Ecuador. Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit more about our lighting process and how we came up with the sort of look and the color palette for the film, and how it helped to support the story. Yeah,
so you're exactly right. We're trying to do everything to support the story that Amaru is telling. One of the ways we're doing that through lighting is simply through time of day to start off. Like, she gets up very, very early in the morning, so we wanted the time of day to reflect that. And we wanted to sell the idea that her journey is a long journey. It's a 2 or 3 hour journey from her home to the school. So she gets there at like 9 or 10. And we wanted, to really sell that idea, tell that story. But second, we wanted to be very cognizant of where the audience is looking the whole time. So we obviously want the audience to engage with Mayu. So we put her in very vibrant colors. She's in primary reds and blues, which we also saw in the reference. So it's still very true to the culture. And in contrast to that, we wanted to have the environment in more cool colors and slightly desaturated, which, through all the current timeline, it puts her more at odds with the environment, again, to help tell that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And, because we were trying to create two worlds, like one when she's actually traveling down, and then there is the flashbacks, right? The interaction with her mother and the teachings from her mother. And then we wanted to make a little differentiate between the type of lighting that we do, but also the type of cameras and type of animation, right, Jason?
Yeah, when she goes back into her memories and is thinking about her mom, we were treating the camera very differently, very still camera moves as opposed to moving ones throughout the current time. And then also the way her mom was animated. Throughout the rest of the time, when we were talking about real time, current time, we were trying to be very believable, because Mayu goes through some challenges and we want it to feel kind of threatening and scary. But when she's remembering her mother, we wanted that to feel a bit more ethereal. So we treated the animation differently. She moves a little bit more fluidly. It's a lot softer, which was really interesting to, first of all, just as an animator, showing your director their mother, because his mom played Kalpa, Mayu's mother,
right.
which was really interesting. Just, luckily, Amaru is the most enthusiastic director I think I've ever seen, which is awesome. You're like,
I concur.
Is this okay? And he's like, oh my God, it's amazing. And you're like, yes. But it was a wonderful challenge to try and think, like, how can we treat her differently and really pay homage to, the memory that she's having of her mother.
Right, and then additionally with the lighting as well. Like if you look at the flashback scenes, they're much more warm. Like especially in the morning is a good example. In the morning where Mayu comes down from the mountain, where a lot of blues in the background and desaturated. But when she goes back into the flashback with her mother, the same morning, just a little bit earlier, it's all pinks and purples and much warmer, where she's really drawing that strength from her mother. Similar in like the sequence inside the house, it's much warmer, and in the scene where she goes back and is remembering her mom talking about Minga, we have the warmth of the house, the adobe, and the farm.
Yeah, and to reinforce the warmth of the flashbacks, we actually fade into blue in the transition between the current time and the flashback, right?
Makes it hit home a little harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another really important piece of the storytelling here was the music. I think we actually have a video, but maybe Amara, you can talk about the musicians that we used and what that process was like.
Yeah, well, that process was just beautiful. We were lucky, thanks to Jen. We really wanted to push authenticity, our producer. And Jen had the wonderful idea, like, hey, what about music? Let's make it even more original. I'm like, I like what we're going for. So, and then I'm like, okay, Jen, maybe, I can find a couple of musicians from Ecuador. And, we were lucky to have Carlos and Vanessa, his daughter, and they also work with 3 other people. They made an amazing job. They did just incredible music. The process was very interesting. I think like the last soundtrack is called Sumac Warmi. It's a mix between the Quechua and the Spanish. And they built the song in a way that they were trying to keep telling the story. And Sumac Warmi means like strong woman. And it's just kind of like another little story behind Picchu, where we are trying to say, like, especially women from those places, they don't have the same opportunities. So they just kept bringing more love into the story itself, and it was beautiful. And the way that we built the rest of the soundtrack, it was really cool because I get with Carlos, and then we played the movie at that stage, and then I will tell Carlos, like, I need a sound, something that kind of tells the audience that Mayu's feeling this way, and he will go like, wait. So he goes, brings a new instrument, and then he plays live. So I'm like, yes, but maybe it's something like that. Like he goes back and forth with different instruments. So that was pretty interesting.
And here's a little clip of him playing. And didn't you say that he made a lot of his own instruments?
He did. Even for, yes, he makes some of his instruments. He has more than 30 years of experience making instruments. But he also went to the mountains, record like the frogs, the wind, the river, and things like that, just to make it more authentic.
That's super cool. Yeah, and he recorded so many different sounds that were used in for all the sound effects in the film.
And talking about that, so his daughter also helped us with, well, she sings the songs, so she has an amazing voice, but also she helped us with the casting of the girls, right? To play the Mayu and Saiwa. That experience was a little tough because it's kind of hard to say no to young girls who really wanted to be part of the film, but you have to pick 2. But in talking about that, like Jason said, my mom also played Mayu's mom. So there's a lot of every single flashback that you see here is pretty much my mom, how she taught me to face life and not to never give up. And she's like, breathe, Amaro, breathe. It's the same thing that you see here. So Jason, do we want to go to animation?
Well, yeah, definitely we should talk about animation. Here's just another slide with some of the instruments that Carlos created. Also, here's a nice photo of Amaru's mom, who voiced Mayu's mother and was our culture advisor on the film, which was awesome working with her.
Super helpful.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, so Jason, maybe you could talk a little bit about how we brought the characters to life.
Absolutely. This is something that I think we have to do at every presentation where we talk about animation, is show video reference, because it's embarrassing, and that's what animators like to do. So I had the great pleasure of being able to animate the last shot in the film, which was super honoring. Like, it was just, I loved it. And this was the video reference for that. We wanted to have Mayu come in and sit on her mother's lap, and so That is me. I don't know if we mentioned it, but all the animation was done in Blender, which was great for a number of reasons. One is I just enjoy animating in Blender. It's a lot of fun. But also because it's got a video sequence editor built in and compositing built in, you could do things like this really easily, which is just take your video reference, do a quick rotomat around it, plop the video reference in the scene, and animate it around. And yeah, it was super fun. So that's a blocking pass, just trying to get the acting down. And I think we were talking about actually leaving that in the film for the end, but then we decided, no, got to simulate the clothing. So yeah, so this is the next pass, taking that, just trying to figure out how to take my video reference and turn it into the physicality of what the character needed to do. There was actually a lot of complexity in here in terms of how to handle the notebook. A lot of, like, for any of you who do animation, parenting and reparenting and adjusting the pivots and trying to move things around so she could open the book and make it look natural and control it with 2 hands, which I'm happy to dive into great detail afterwards if somebody's interested. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. Yeah, and then this was the final animation on this one. You'll notice that the clothing isn't simulated here, of course, because there was a unique challenge in this case where I decided to have Mayu holding on to her mother's arm while her mother is also holding on to her, which meant that the poncho that is on Mayu is going to be adjusted and simulated based off of what her arm is doing, which is affected by her mother's arm, but her mother is also touching her skirt, which is going to be simulated. So we had this like crazy layering of animation and simulation that we needed to do. So after this pass, then we sent it over to do the simulation on the clothing, which you can see here. And then after that was simulated, after the skirt was simulated, I went through and then reanimated the mother's arm, and then we resimulated the poncho on top of that. And then in this case, the hair was hand animated. We did, on some shots, we hand animated the hair, and in some shots we simulated the hair, depending on the complexity and how much time we had. Yeah. So this one was, and there's nothing more fun than animating hair.
I think when our cloth person saw this shot, they were like, "Can we take the poncho off of Mayu?" We were like, "No."
Yeah, they tried, but
yeah, no, she's just home from school. She's got to have the poncho on. And then I think after this we have the final comp.
Yeah, there's that final lit render. Yeah, and so yeah, as you said, we animated the film in Blender. We also lit and rendered it using cycles, and. In order to staff this film with animators, maybe you can talk about what that process was like.
Absolutely.
Because this was, the first film project that we had done as Fuzzy Pixel with Blender, where we hired contractors.
Yeah, so we were really excited. So we're a patron member of the Blender Foundation, which we'll talk a little bit more about. We love open source. We're excited to use it. And in this particular show, we wanted to see how much open source we could do. Knowing that we were going to use Blender, we reached out to find animators for it. And because of the timing of when things were going and where artists happened to be, we ended up finding a lot of really talented animators all around the world, which was great. But it was a unique challenge for us to figure out, okay, how do we actually make an environment where those animators can come on and be successful as artists, and then also how do we make sure that our infrastructure is going to hold up for it. So we're using Nimble Studio for everything, which is definitely one of the benefits of working at AWS here, is we get to use this new tech and figure out how to have a complete remote studio all in the cloud. And we actually ended up creating 5 different Nimble Studios to try this out, where we had our main studio over in Oregon, with our render farm. We have, there's very, very rough architecture there of just calling things out. And again, we could talk about that afterwards. But we used like work docs to make sure we could onboard artists correctly so they weren't just showing up and being like, open Blender, now what? But it'd be like, okay, here's how you're going to work with each of your different departments. We did code commit for all of our pipeline tools. So we could go ahead and just check in the latest code and pipeline tools, and then those would automatically get distributed to everybody. And then we used S3 for storage for applications and for all of our production data and for our pipeline tools. And what's nice about that is because it was in S3, we could replicate it to all the other regions really, really quickly. And the artists didn't even have to think about it. They would just, wherever they were, they would open up their instance. They'd have access to all the tools and everything that they needed and their production data. And so that became a really seamless experience for them, which was really nice.
Yeah, and so Blender was the the backbone of our pipeline, but we also had a couple other tools that we use. So maybe you can discuss our full tool set.
Yeah, so one of the things we like to do is sort of give people the right environment for the task that they happen to be doing and give them the right tool that makes sense for them. So you'll notice here, in terms of our production management tool, we use CGWire's Kitsu, which is an open source tool, and it was great. It really starts up very simply for people to use. I just keep hitting this, sorry. And so it's easy to sort of track what you're doing. We use that as our main sort of pipeline for managing the production. We had Linux instances for most of the animation and lighting and compositing tools, and Windows instances for anything that required more Windows-based workflows, like ZBrush and Substance Painter, Photoshop, and DaVinci Resolve for editing. We used ThinkBox Deadline for rendering everything in the cloud, and basically would just burst out to the farm. Whenever we needed to render, it would scale up and scale down as it needed to. And those were also Linux workstations for rendering. And you could see a little bit of Maya, a little bit of SpeedTree, and some Houdini and Nuke to round it all out.
Awesome. So as you mentioned, we are patron members of the Blender Development Fund. So yeah, we definitely wanted to use Blender, push it to its limits, and then also give back to the community. So Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about how we are giving back to the greater animation community and the Blender community?
Yeah, so in a couple different ways. First off, we used Blender. I don't think I'd even used Blender before, 2020. And Jason came on and was like, we should learn this. We're going to do a short film in this. I was like, okay, let's do it. And now, I'm super comfortable in Blender and fixing problems every day. But along comes that you learn experience, and I know it worked for me in Maya before, what worked in Soft before, and our rigger Nico, doing rigging and animation and things like that in Blender. We learn a lot. But we can also give back to Blender. So we're in a conversation with Blender to be like, hey, did you think of this? Did you try that? Here's something you may not have thought of at all that's new, and we can get that in there and really help the community and help build up Blender into something better than it already is. And then secondly, as we've done with our other short films, we put assets up on GitHub. So you can get the character Mayu on GitHub, you can get her notebook, you can get the animation rig, you can get the render rig, so you can render her out and all her full textures and everything. And I think also the tree branch is up there. And then additionally, we've also put Noah, a character from Spanner, up on the Animation Software Foundation website as part of their repository as well.
Yeah, there's a brand new asset repository. It's called the DPEL, Digital Production Example Library, that we just contributed one of our character rigs to, and we're hoping to contribute more there in the future. So keep an eye out for that. And then as far as the impact that Picchu is going to have, Amaro, can you discuss your plans for Picchu for the future and what you're hoping to do with it?
Yes, absolutely. Like you were saying, Chris, giving back to the community, not only with the technology, but sending the message as well. So right now, Picchu went viral last week on Ecuador, literally viral. Been reaching out by so many media and people and saying this is a beautiful thing. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people in Ecuador know Blender, and they were amazed that we were able to do something like this in Blender, because I consider ourselves a team a very talented team. We are 12, right? No, I'm mistaken.
Give or take.
Give and take. But we definitely like to push, right? We push each other, we support each other, because we want to create the best that we can do with the tools, because that's we believe in that. We have passion to create this. So, and I think, speaking for obviously our project, I think we achieved that. It's beautiful, and creating that impact with the message and saying that we're using the technology with Nimble Studio, and then we have Blender, we have these other amazing tools. It's just creating a beautiful impact. And what comes next to Picchu is just keep sending the message, call for action, and hopefully I can travel in October to Ecuador and spend a day.
Do a premiere down there?
A making of, a premiere making of, but also I would love to go there and spend a day with one of these faraway schools, maybe my own school, go back to it and spend a day with kids, play with them, football, we call it soccer, and yeah, just keep sending the message. I think this is a proof that we can create beautiful things with amazing technology.
Awesome.